in order to, like, just to kind of capitalize on what Betty Ray said a little bit, I'm going to actually talk a little bit more about bias and mental models, and particularly think about the human brain, right? So, and Betty Ray, like, kind of gave us a little, like, hashtag spoiler that this was coming, right? That we know that implicit bias is not is not coded for racist, right? And we know that, like, implicit bias is something that we can all have, and that's largely because of the way that our brains work and kind of the way that we move throughout society. So the thing that we need to think about relative to bias and mental models is, like, information processing. So the reality is, y'all, we are seeing so much information at once. Like, our brains can really only process a very small portion of what everything that we're taking in, even though most of us, like, have maybe not spent a lot of time out in society outside of in classroom, right? Like, because of the pandemic or whatever. It doesn't matter. Wherever you are, your brain is constantly processing so much information. And I want to say it's something a little bananas, like maybe 12 million bits of information, like, constantly. And so we can actually only be consciously aware of a very small portion of that information. And as a way to deal with that, essentially what happens is in our subconscious, our brain does three things. The first thing it does is it categorizes things. So guess what? Like, this is where and you look at somebody for the first time, you see somebody, and typically there's two ways people will categorize things very quickly according to the research: race, gender. So that's the first thing that our brains do. It automatically is going to categorize, because, again, we're trying to process so much information at once that part of the way that we can process this is that we can categorize into kind of likeness, because that makes it easier to process. The next thing that we do is we create associations, right? So if I say the words peanut butter, what is the first thing that pops into your head when I say peanut butter? Feel free to put that in the chat. What is it? Like, because I know what my answer is. P.S. Oh, this is great. Jelly, crunchy. Jelly, yum, sandwich, bread. Mine would have been bacon, by the way, peanut butter and bacon. I know it's delicious. But anyway, you see what I'm saying here? Like, we create associations, and we create associations based on, like, how we're moving through the world and, you know, what is all around us. That's the other thing that our brain does, is it fills in the gaps, right? So when we don't know information, we're going to categorize things, we're going to create associations. But how do we create associations when we don't know that information? We fill in the gaps in a way. And where do we fill in the gaps? Well, we fill in the gaps by the way that we're surrounded, right? Which means that we're going to fill in the gaps from the media, from social media these days, right? Like, I know a lot of people get their information from Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, or, you know, fill in the blank there, right? But we're gonna literally fill in the gaps of what we don't know based on all of the things that are surrounding us and the way that we take in information, right? So if we're thinking about environments in where we're only seeing a lot of ourselves reflected, right? That's how we start to create that vision, right? That's how we fill in the gaps and we create that vision of the world. So these things all essentially start to contribute to and make up our mental models. And our mental models are essentially the frames that help us better understand and navigate the world. These are going to be influenced by the way that you were raised, by your race, by your socioeconomic status, by the media that you're consuming, right? Like, so that's why we talk about racism and anti-racism. And, like, understanding that, you know, like, there's not a I'm not racist, there's anti-racist and there's racist, because all of those things essentially are contributing to the mental models. Like, as we're taking that information in, it contributes to those mental models and how we move through the world. So if we understand that our brains are designed in such a way that they're going to create shortcuts in order for us to, you know, process all of this information, and we couple that with the idea that we know that those shortcuts are often influenced by the things that we are exposed to, that gives us the basis to start doing some of that critical reflection. Next slide. So if we think about those mental models, right, they're going to shape what we think and how we understand. If they're shaping how we think or if they're shaping what we think and how we understand, that means they're also going to impact how we see our connections and opportunities. And they essentially simplify complexity, right? So we talked about the fact that your brain is trying to process all of this information at once. So in order to simplify it, it categorizes it, it creates associations, and it fills in the gaps. All of those things therefore impact your reasoning and how we assign relevance of pieces, right? So as we think about the fact that we are all professionals, you all are professionals as educators, you're in your classrooms, now knowing this, that means that one of the things that we have to do is we have to continuously engage in that critical reflection. Next slide. So I'm going to kick off a little bit about critical reflection, and then I'm going to hand it over to Raquam in just a minute. But essentially, when we think about critical reflection and we think about what we just talked about relative to how our brains work and how they're influenced by all of those things around us, that means we need to critically reflect on what our perceptions are. So how we see people and how we perceive reality, we need to do some critical reflection around that. Don't worry, Raquam's going to tell you how to engage in that critical reflection. I'm just telling you that we need to do it, right? We need to critically reflect on our attitude. How do we react towards certain people, and sit with that. We need to reflect on our behaviors, like how receptive are we towards certain people, or how not receptive are we? We need to reflect on where our attention goes. So which aspects of a person do we pay the most attention to? And we need to reflect on our listening. How much do we actively listen to what certain people say? Now, I will tell you personally, that's one I have to do a lot of hard work on for a lot of different reasons. And, one of the biggest things that I know is as soon as people start spouting off well, research, blah, 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 or the regulations, and then says a number, I think I pretty much just go dead inside and I stop listening, right? So that's something where I have to critically reflect on why that's happening. And that's just a really benign example of the fact that the first thing we have to do is recognize that we need to do these things and then engage in that reflection. And then the last thing that we really want to reflect on are micro affirmations. And you might say, well, DJ, what are micro affirmations? I know what microaggressions are, but what's a micro affirmation? Well, at the other end of the scale there, a micro affirmation is how much comfort we give to people. How much are we reinforcing positively, and how much comfort or how little comfort are we giving to people? And then looking at, critically reflecting on what that pattern looks like. Am I only giving comfort to people that look a certain way or that behave a certain way? And am I giving less comfort to people that behave a certain way or look a certain way? So those are the types of critical reflections that we want to start to look at so that we can acknowledge them, we can address them, and we can adapt.